we were talking about psychedelics before, and you were telling me about how you had kind of a transformational experience recently, and I've had some experiences like that before. So you want to start off with just talking a little bit about how that helped you recently?
Yeah, all kind of sparked from the recent craziness with the pandemic and everything. And I was actually going through an interesting time. It was what I like to call it a challenge of existence. I had a lot of challenges that were coming all at once. So I actually got laid off at the same time. I had a relationship that was ending. At the same time, I had a brother that was also going through a lot of legal trouble. At the same time, I was going through a lot of drama within my own family. And it seemed like it was very big at the time. And I remember actually with our last conversation, we were talking about Jordan Peterson, who, was also a native neighbor to the north, such as yourself. And he actually had talked about the hero's journey. And he had talked about how just to be a better person, not just necessarily a better man, although I was going at it to be a better man and face the challenges that life was giving me. You had to essentially, the Pinocchio story, which was go against the whale and kind of save your father, i.e., yourself and your wisdom and what you know about this world, and also the exploration that goes along with it. And I was like, well, what's this final piece that I need to like put this together? Because it seems like just life is just very hard. And I had actually looked at different answers, and I'd always been interested in the Joe Rogan experience. And he had a gentleman by the name of Paul Stamets on there. And I remember
mushroom guy. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. He had Paul Stamets on there, and he was a mycologist. And I've always had, originally I had gone into school. I'm a biomedical engineer by trade or by my degree, but I had gone to school originally for biology, and I always found mycology to be quite fascinating because it was like kind of that, I felt like it was that weird space between eukaryotic cells and plant cells. And you have this weird kind of combination of the two within mycelium and just within mushrooms and just that entire thing. And I was like, there's got to be some reason why this is still around and why that was almost like the first multi-celled organism that ever existed on Earth at all. So I was kind of apprehensive, and I live in Denver, full disclosure. So here they've decriminalized psychedelic mushrooms.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool.
Yes, they've decriminalized it in Denver. So I was like, you know what? If we can do anything here, we've got all of the things we need. We've got a challenge that's facing me in life. We have access to a very powerful kind of transformative, frame changing, I guess, medium that I would say. And I was like, what can you do with this? And I was like, of all times, is the time to take the hero's journey. So I took what was considered to be a hero's dose, which is about 7 grams of
wow.
And I went on what I believe was going to be a 3-hour long hike. I actually ended up listening to this very in-depth book on tape that kind of changed up my whole outlook on things. It was like a mixture of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules of Life. And then I also had like this book called The Rational Male, which was like part of this red pill thing, which I don't necessarily feed 100% into, but at the same time, it was something that I needed just because I felt like, I mean, this was on Father's Day. So it was kind of like more of a all male, just regaining your framework and regaining control of your life again. So I was doing this walk, and I'm having this amazing thing. And I knew I was feeling things because this hike was, like I said, supposed to be about 3 hours. About a half hour in, trees start talking to me, and they're like, yo, man, you're doing great. And life, you're one with the earth, man. And I'm like, yo, trees, I don't know why, but like, you've never said shit to me before, but I'm not going to question it, man. You guys are dope.
Yeah, that's the right attitude to have with psychedelics too, to just accept what's happening, because if you fight it, then that's how a bad trip can start, right?
Yeah, I actually ended up sharing some with my father, and he had a completely different trip because he has these really, really tightly held thought patterns that he's even a little afraid of ever breaking. And when I saw that, it's kind of like I love the fact that I kind of saw that because it told me that it was like, sometimes it's okay to relinquish. It's like a roller coaster ride. Just let yourself go on the ride, and then
Yeah,
eventually it will be over. But just know it's just a ride, and that reality itself is kind of a ride, and it's you can enjoy it or you can sit there and you can be victim to all the things that happen, but things are always going to be happening. And what I like, so I'm on this trip, and I meant to tell you everything. So it actually turned out to be kind of a bad trip at first because it was actually at a public park, and
oh
I'm like, all right, well, I'm thinking this hike is going to take 3 hours. I finish it in about like an hour and a half. So I haven't even peaked. Like, note, I've taken 7 grams. So I'm like feeling things, but I'm not peaking out. And for anybody that hasn't done psychedelics before, your peak is essentially where you begin to have your neural pathways, you feel them extra hard. And when I say feel them extra hard, I mean whatever kind of subconscious, because your mind is always your mind, but sometimes you can bury things and you have to come to terms with whatever's going on in your mind. So if anybody decides to, after watching this, go on a psychedelic experience, I would suggest that you practice meditation for at least a week, do some fasting, make sure that you have a good diet and everything. I mean, I did everything that you possibly could do to take the most out of this. Have a healthy lifestyle, drink a lot of water, and you'll get the best out of it. But even with that, if you take a hero's dosage, meaning you take about at least 5 grams or above of
yeah,
psychedelic mushrooms, you will you will you'll still have things, even if you are basically a good person. All you'll have to come to terms with a lot of things that are going on in your mind. So I'm starting to have the realization that this is going to happen. So I'm starting to peak. And as this is happening, I'm like, there's families around. This isn't going to be good. I can't be in this park anymore. So I make, and just know, like, kids don't do this at home. I made a bad
yeah.
decision. There was a cop that was around there, and I'm like, look, I can't trip as bad of balls as I know I'm going to trip in this park. So I actually got in my car, and I remember it was bad because I remember I saw my car and I recognized that it was my car, but my car had never looked that beautiful before. I'd never seen it in that kind of shape. I was like, it's so geometrically perfect. This is the most beautiful vehicle I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
And how did I ever even have enough money to even get something that was so beautifully engineered? I remember thinking all of that. And if you've never experienced absolute total bliss with whatever's going on in your life, psychedelics can take you there. Um, so I remember I actually did make the bad decision of getting in my car. I actually drove down the street like just a little bit. It was like next to a highway, and I was doing just well enough to like not anybody. And then I like turn off, and I'm like, if you're gonna trip balls, man, you got to do it in a residential neighborhood where nobody's gonna really think much of it.
Yeah.
So I like, and I mean, I did all of the precautions. I pull over to the side, like I'm out of the way, like nobody would even know that anything's going on. The only thing that sucks is it's the hottest day of like the year. This is like the middle of June, and it was like 90 degrees.
Holy shit.
So yeah. And then on top of that, I don't know if you know what the psychedelic sweats are. Have you ever had them?
I don't think I have, no.
Like when you take a certain amount of psychedelics, like you start, your body starts violently rejecting it, going like, what are you doing? What are you doing? So I'm already sweating from having like just the sheer volume of just thoughts. And I remember it was like even a light hurt because it was just, everything was just started becoming very intense. So I pull over to this place. I'll never forget the street. It was 26th and Robinson, and I'll never forget it. I pull over, and I decide that I'm going to like essentially have my trip full balls of the wall trip. And I get out of my front seat of my car because I don't want, if anybody calls the cops, because I'm tripping that hard. I'm like, if anybody calls the cops, they're going to think I'm trying to like drive away. So I get in the back seat of my car and I just, no AC, just let myself just have this trip. And I mean, I'm going through everything. I'm talking about my childhood. I'm talking about all the traumas that I had. And it's like, people say that you need therapy, and I believe everybody should explore therapy. But like, just imagine 4 or 5 years worth of therapy just truncated into like maybe 5 or 6 hours. And I was experiencing the start of that in the backseat of this car. And I was like going through and I'm like, I'm crying and everything. And it was bad. I remember it was so bad that it was Father's Day weekend. And I actually called my dad on having this trip. And I'm like, hey man, I don't know where you're at. And I know that I'm like in my 30s, but I really need you to come and get me right now because I think it's going to be good. So like I said, I was going through this breakup and I'm like, why did you ever let this woman be like in your life? And then I was also like going down the lines of like, well, it's probably because of your mother. And then it's like, I start thinking about my mother. And then I'm like, oh, well, the whole reason why you feel this way about your mother is because you had this trauma and there was this abandonment thing. And there was like, you have to go through, and whatever you have, you basically in that moment have to deal, and your mind always has the tools to deal. You just don't ever really have the quote unquote time to deal with it. And because time is a perception of the mind, time slows down, it speeds up, and it does it all at the same time for what it needs to. And it kind of gives you this whole thing. I remember very vividly Joe Rogan had this line that kind of summed it up. It was like, the best part about doing psychedelics is the fact that you realize that reality is bullshit and that it's all a
Yeah.
game. It's all a game. It really is. It's all a game. It has different rules and we put different shit on top of it, but you can have as much fun with it as you want. And especially being in the Western world, a lot of people don't appreciate the fact that you have free speech. You can do whatever you want. And this is what you can do whatever you want here. And it's amazing. You have so many freedoms, and it kind of lets you realize just that kind of thing because you dissolve your ego. So I'm going through this ego dissolving. I'm in the backseat of this car, and I'm like having all of these just really vivid, striking thoughts. And eventually and I remember hard because I was tripping so hard. I was like, I can't drive this car. There's no way I can drive this car. I actually ended up leaving the car there, and my father picked me up, and we had like this long, intense, like loving hug. And like for guys especially, and I hate to bring it up, but I mean eventually we're going to talk about it anyway, but especially for Black guys, it is not a cool thing to be that emotionally vulnerable and like be okay with it. And I just remember being like, yeah, I know that I shouldn't quote unquote be okay with this, but I am. And I was like, yo, man, like there's nothing wrong with showing love for my father. Like he was like a little scared for me, and he was like, you're going through a lot, man. So he didn't even know I was tripping on mushrooms. He just thought I was going through an emotional breakdown. So I remember getting back home, and then, he's like, yo, just lay down in your bed. And I'm like, and this is my childhood home. So I'd actually gone back on this weekend to, actually it was Colorado Springs. And then I come up to Denver and everything. And then, my dad had kind of laid me down when I was in my familial home around the Denver area too. And, he had like put me down and given me some water and everything. And I remember looking up at the ceiling fan. And this was when I was like, this is amazing. This is because I like had an emotional breakdown. And usually when people have those, like you feel bad, but I felt great. And I looked up at the ceiling fan and it wasn't my ceiling fan anymore. Like, no, this is my childhood room. It turned into like this big cell. Like when I saw the rotation.
Go back for a second. So the emotional breakdown, did it feel like cleansing, and that's why it made you feel good?
Yes. It was one of those things where it's like during the time I was like, why is this so hard? And it's like, this is just your mind, man. You're in control of that. And when you have that objectivity, and it's almost like having a passenger. It's almost like having a better version of yourself talk to yourself, because you do have that ego dissolving. I think a lot of people put a lot of things and think you're supposed to think something. You're supposed to have some kind of outcome. And that's what causes a lot of people a lot of pain, because you think that your reality is supposed to be a certain way. And psychedelics, particularly mushrooms, LSD, I don't think does it as much, but psychedelic mushrooms, mainly probably because it's more of an earthy kind of thing, allows you to break off that layer of reality to kind of like, I guess, better evaluate why you're feeling a certain way. And it's almost like having an extra voice that goes like, I'm sad. And then instead of just feeling sadness, you think about your sadness in a very objective way. Like, well, what would make you sad? What are the thought patterns that you have? And then you start thinking about, that's why you go deep, because you go deeper into your childhood. Like, why does this particular thing make me mad? Why does this particular thing make me uncomfortable? And having to actually deal with that, it almost forces a depth of the entire experience of being a human being, because when you have to explore that within yourself, you realize that that's something that you can explore within other people too. And that's a powerful thing. When you realize that you have that many layers, I don't look at people as people anymore. I look at them as a child that grew up and they're very layered, and they got different layers as ages went on. And it's almost like the oak tree, except those layers can also be related to emotionality. So when I see very old people that are angry, I'm like, dude, that's a lot of years of pain. And I don't know what happened, but it was compounded. And then it almost feels like, what I loved about the psychedelic experience was it felt like being a child again and having that curiosity. And you repair all of those things that made you afraid of being who you truly were. And think about the time when you were the most charming in your life. You were the most charming when you were a child, because you genuinely wanted the best out of life. You didn't care about colors. You didn't care about, political things. You didn't care about it. It broke everything down to a root. It just broke everything down to, this might be BS, but we forget that a lot of what we live is BS, and that we're living by patterns that other people have instilled in us, and things don't necessarily have to be as heavy as we make them to be. And I realized that when I even looked at my ceiling fan, and like I said, the ceiling fan that I had in my childhood room forever, it became like this entity. And I remember it had like a light bulb in it. Those new light bulbs that are like kind of spirally, and they are highly energy efficient. I was looking up at this because it was a ceiling fan. It had like one of those light bulbs in the middle, and sometimes they have those bulbs, but the bulb was missing. So it was just a bare naked bulb. It was just, and I remember looking at it, and because of the way the light was, like I had turned the light off, but you could still see the light bulb. And I was watching the ceiling fan propeller go around, and it became like this weird kind of like viscous kind of, it looked like a cell. It looked like a cell. And I remember looking at the light bulb, and it became like tentacles. And then like the two like different kind of controlling mechanisms, the two chains that you pull to control, the light and also the speed of the propeller for the ceiling fan, those also became tentacles, and they were like reaching out to me. And then like this thing was talking to me, and it was like, I've been here this entire time, and you've been sad since you were a child, Park. And like, it was the personification of something that I felt even since my childhood, because I was back in my childhood room. And even though this experience I even know now wasn't real, even while it was happening, and that's why I enjoy mushrooms, because mushrooms, you're tripping, but you kind of have what I like to call the anchor of reality. So it's not like you leave so far that it's like, oh God. And I think that's what a lot of people's misconception is about psychedelics, where it's like, I don't want to lose all control. And I'm like, you don't lose all control. It just changes the perception of what you already see. And it's something that your mind might have already done, but you don't have so many layers of things in front of you. And it's almost like being full imagination. So you might imagine something, but whatever you're seeing, and a lot of people see like demons or whatever, it's like, dude, you see that anyway. You just don't acknowledge the fact that that's what you see. Now
Yeah.
it's being forced to be there. It's kind of like you know, people that like smoke weed and then they're like, oh, I'm anxious when I smoke weed. I'm like, dude, you're just an anxious person. Weed
Yeah. Yeah.
weed just releases that layer of your BS, your ego, that tells you that you shouldn't be and like temps that down, but that's just the way that you are. And I think that's
Yeah.
why a lot of people are afraid of just, especially the softer drugs. Like, you know, I don't really consider psychedelic mushrooms to be a drug like that. It just grows like that. You just eat it after it's dried. It's not like anybody did anything. I don't really consider DMT to be a drug. Like your body and things on this earth naturally produce it. It's an expanding experience, and I believe that there's a lot of governments that probably don't want you to have that just because you go, oh, this is all bullshit, and then you won't show up to work anymore. And so, you know, that's why I feel that there's a lot of restraints. And then, you know, of course, like heroin, I don't think anybody's going to get any better doing heroin. So there are certain things, but you know, having that experience and having the totality of knowing that your mind can do literally anything. It can change your entire perception of this world. It was very powerful to me. And it was very powerful because I came out of something that was hard, like almost better than I had when I had entered that hard moment. And that's very hard for people to imagine, to come out better at the end of a challenge than you were at the beginning of it. And I completely owe that all to the psychedelic experience that I had, and you know, laying down. And then I remember going to sleep after seeing this alien like thing, and then I just remember waking up the next day, and I still felt what I like to call is the vapors of the of the experience. So it's like, you know, you're a little lightheaded, you're lighter than you were before, but you know, you're okay. And I had like an awesome, and I just remember thinking about like just signs of how awesome the experience was the next day. And signs were like, we went to McDonald's and we got like an extra hash brown with our egg McMuffins, you know, that kind of thing. And it's like, it's little, but you're like, yo, man, that had to be an awesome experience. I got an extra hash brown. And like, I had like some of the deepest conversations with any of my friends because I had a level of vulnerability that I didn't care about having with them. You know, sometimes there's this whole machismo and I want my friends to think a certain thing about me, this, that, and the other thing. I didn't care about any of that. All I wanted was, I was like, look, this is an incredible experience. I want to make sure that before I leave this earth, that I make the most out of all my days. And I can honestly say that that happened due to that psychedelic experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. Like yeah, like for example, that reminds me what you just said at the end there of the first time I've eaten mushrooms 3 times, and I remember I think I'd say the first time was probably the most like transformative and effective for me, and I remember like after I ate the mushrooms, it had like you were talking about, I had those sort of vapors after, and like to the point where, as you were talking about, like how you just appreciate all aspects of life so much more, and it sort of removes that layer of like giving a shit about other people's impressions of you so much that like I remember for it was probably for like a year after I ate them, every day I felt like, man, I know some things are going bad, but today's a pretty awesome day. And I would like hug everyone when I saw them and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. And
Yeah.
I remember too, like when like when I ate mushrooms too, it was like I ate them with my best friend at the time, and we were having like the most deep and meaningful conversations ever, like you were talking about. And that happened the second time too, when I ate them with one of my really good friends who's been my friends for years. We had like such a deep emotional connection, and that's one of the things too, that you made me think about, like when you were talking about weed and how it seems to make some people anxious, but that's like just how you are as a person. And in like a similar way, I think weed, especially for me, but for a lot of people, it kind of like removes this, like you were saying, it removes like this caring about bullshit about having other, about wanting other people to have the right perceptions of you. It, to me, it makes me open up more with people, and it makes me more comfortable with talking too, because I'm actually naturally pretty introverted. So like, especially when I first started my YouTube channel, I was really nervous, and I was stuttering all the time, and I didn't have that much emotion in my voice. But I've like, weed helps with that, and obviously like that in combination with
Mhm.
practicing a hell of a lot with talking with people helps make it feel a lot more natural.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's the human experience is made to have connection, and I think a lot of these, well, for lack of a better word, drugs, um, they allow you to have that connection. It's almost like a level up of being able to relate to people. It's a level up on being able to relate to yourself, which I think ultimately, because you're able to relate to yourself better, you're able to relate to people better.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like you were saying, it's like you were saying how you can see um, people, like you see them as the collection of what happened to them in their lives and how it's influenced them. Like how you were talking about how if you see like an older grumpy person, you think, wow, that's a lot, like that's a lot of years of pain that has influenced that.
Mhm. And the thing is you don't realize that that's a lot of years of pain on them until you acknowledge the pain within yourself, and you're like, okay, the reason why I was mad was because, if you genuinely have a sense of peace, you realize that anger is just it's an anchor. It's nothing that will ever help you out. One of the comic books that I've like absolutely loved, like I'm a Marvel dude, but DC did a really good job with Green Lantern. And Green Lantern, I constantly think about this concept. They made a bunch of other rings on top of the Green Lantern ring. So then, like, they have a red ring, and that's like that's supposed to be anger. Then they have like a yellow ring, and that's supposed to be like fear. I think there's like an orange ring, and that's avarice. But they had all of these things that were supposed to be about like the human condition. And there's a lot of people that have the red ring because you have to have anger to have it, but it's the weakest of the rings.
Oh, cool.
The most powerful of the rings is the blue ring. And do you know what the blue ring is supposed to represent?
Love.
No, hope.
Oh, yeah, just as good.
But this is what I loved about the comic though. The blue ring is without any power unless there's a green ring around. So do you know what the green ring is supposed to represent?
No.
Willpower and fortitude. If you don't have the willpower and fortitude to put together what you hope for, your hope means nothing.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's awesome.
And having the psychedelic experience kind of let me have, I had already appreciated that storyline, but I didn't appreciate how deeply emotionally intelligent you had to be to even come up with that concept.
Yeah, yeah, it's like a spiritual concept really too. Like it's how it's kind of related to um how taking psychedelics is spiritual experience too. And that's one thing I just remembered that I thought about when you were talking there about how, they call taking psychedelic drugs a trip for a reason. Like you're gonna go through something and have like a
Mhm.
really meaningful and sometimes challenging and definitely profound experience, and then you immerse yourself in the experience, and then when you come out of it, you feel just like this overwhelming feeling of bliss. And it just like you said, it affects not only your perceptions of reality, but your perceptions of how you see and interact with other people.
And the most profound thing I believe comes down to the fact that all of it was in your mind in the first place. The most interesting thing about psychedelics is nothing that you see is something that you couldn't have fathomed, because essentially you're fathoming everything. It's an increase of connections within your mind. A lot of people think that it's some kind of like, it takes you, and it's like, no drug really takes you. Like, that's something that I get a little irritated when people go like, well, what if you get lost in this? Like, you'll get lost in whatever it is you want to get lost in, if your whole point is to get lost. Like, a lot of people think that, for instance, marijuana. I had a conversation with somebody the other day about how marijuana was a quote unquote gateway drug. I'm like, look, if you're looking for something out of drugs, if you're looking for something out of the experience, you will find that experience. It might not be with weed. Like, if you're somebody that really wants to escape life because you have a hard life, like, heroin is the perfect one. But weed does kind of give you the vapors of kind of feeling that way. But if you want to have that full, I don't want to be here anymore kind of experience, you can go with crystal meth, you can go with heroin, you can go with all these other things.
And you can use weed for that too. Like that's the thing about drugs, I think. Like, it depends on what you use them for. If you're using them to escape reality, then that's like a bad relationship with the drug. If you use it to enhance reality, then that's a good relationship with it, in my opinion.
Correct. I mean, I know some people that have a relationship with weed, like, all I do is just, I don't even use it to party. I sleep. I just smoke weed, then I go to sleep, and that's it. And, I'm like, hey, that's great. They're like, I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to get a prescription. I don't have to get anything. And as far as psychedelics go, I know a lot of people, and I can say from my own experience, that have had very traumatic experiences that have ranged from serious trauma. I'm talking about all the way up to, like, I was molested, something like that, down to, I've just gone through something that might be slightly hard, and they've all gotten through, or if not completely gotten through, they've gotten to a point of at least acceptance with it, or thought about it more. Because I know that even people that have bad trips, my father actually had a bad trip, and he came out of it, but he was more thoughtful about the reason why he had it, because it's all something that you came up with in your mind. You've got to think of it as, I'm in the tech industry, so you can have an application, but essentially your kernel, that's what allocates all of your different resources that are on your hardware to whatever your software is. So you've got to essentially think of your psychedelic experience being a new kernel. You always have those resources. It just loads them up differently into the front range of your mind. So you've always been processing things the same way. All of a sudden, you've got a whole new operating system that comes in. Same resources. You still have the same brain. It just uses it differently than it used to before.
Yeah, that's like that reminds me of the metaphor that I've heard Joe Rogan use before for psychedelics. It's like you're still. It's like it gives you new software for you to experience reality with. So you're not running on the same programs. You like throw out all those old programs, and that you reprogram yourself in a way.
I think of it as just a software upgrade, a pack. Like, it's adding new features. It's adding new
Yeah.
features to what you already had, and it's the best part about it is you didn't have to buy a whole new computer. You didn't have to get a whole new brain. You didn't have to learn a whole lot. You just had to think differently about what you did know.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's what stops a lot of people, and I think that's what kind of is leading a lot of people to being stuck in ideological loops, not thinking that there's only one way that you can think about something. And if somebody thinks differently, then that's a direct affront to the way that you think about something. And that's
Textbook naive realism.
correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. Like one of the themes there, I think, is that like psychedelics and weed and lots of other things too, like you talked about meditation as well. Like, these are all really introspective things. And like you were just saying there, if you're not introspective, or especially if you're afraid of being introspective, which could be one of the fears of psychedelics, then you're not examining your worldview to the extent that you could be examining it, and maybe you're just basically setting a trap for yourself to be stuck in your ideology. And like you were saying, you might think that, well, the way I think about this is the only correct way to think about it, and if you disagree with me about it, then that makes you a bad person.
Yeah, and I think we've gotten to a point. Speaking of Joe Rogan again, we've gotten to a point in society now where I think belief has gotten so ingrained, as far as political belief, that people are kind of having that as their new religion. And I believe having the psychedelic experience let me at least have that detachment and not necessarily think about us all as being in this big thing of I have to have my side win, otherwise like chaos. It takes you out of the whole thing and goes like, if I was somebody that was not even a person, if I was an alien that was on a whole different planet, I saw the way we were interacting, and I was like, hey, everybody kind of looks the same, like they're bipedal, everybody's thinking, and everybody has these problems, and nobody's happy. And instead of sitting there and getting together and going like, yeah, you look at things differently, but how can I help you with your happiness? And how can you help me with my happiness? And how can we all essentially help each other get to what our best version of happiness is within the frame that we're in? We make a lot of focus on how to essentially change everybody to think the way that we do, so that our version of happiness is everybody's version of happiness. And that seems right in the first way. But then when you think about it, that's like almost like what, some of the worst people in history have thought.